everybody, and welcome back to the 80s, 90s Forgotten Shows. The series where we dig up the television shows that used to dominate living rooms, syndication blocks, and family TV nights, but somehow don't get talked about enough anymore. And today we're talking about a show that, for years, was absolutely everywhere. Coach. Now, if you grew up in the late 80s or throughout the 90s, there's a very good chance you remember hearing the theme song, seeing college football jackets on TV every week, and hearing somebody yell, "Dauber!" But here's the weird thing about Coach. For a show that lasted almost a full decade, won awards, had huge ratings, and was constantly rerun, it barely gets mentioned today. You hear people talk about Cheers, Full House, Family Matters, or Home Improvement all the time. But Coach? It's kind of got left sitting on the bench. And honestly, that's a crime because this show was funny, comforting, insanely rewatchable, and had one of the most likable casts of the entire era. Today we're going back and talking about why Coach mattered, why it works so well, and why it absolutely deserves to be remembered. Coach debuted in 1989 on ABC and starred Craig T. Nelson as Hayden Fox, the head football coach of the fictional Minnesota State Screaming Eagles. And right away, the concept was genius in its simplicity, because technically this was a sports sitcom, but it really wasn't about sports. It was about personalities. Hayden Fox was old school, stubborn, loud, emotional, intense, and completely dedicated to football. The guy treated everything like a fourth quarter goal line stand. Ordering lunch, fourth quarter. Buying furniture, fourth quarter. Talking about feelings, definitely fourth quarter. And that's what made him hilarious. Because underneath all the yelling and macho energy, Hayden was actually a pretty decent guy trying his best to balance work, relationships, fatherhood, and life. The show basically took this ultra-serious football coach and threw him into everyday situations where football logic absolutely did not apply. And the results were amazing. The biggest reason Coach lasted so long was the cast chemistry. Every great sitcom has that one group where everybody fits together perfectly, and Coach absolutely had that. First, you had Hayden Fox himself. Craig D. Nelson played him perfectly because he could switch from intimidating to lovable in seconds. One moment, he'd be screaming like he was about to bench somebody for fumbling the ball, and the next moment, he'd be giving genuinely heartfelt advice. Then you had Christine Armstrong, played by Shelley Fabares. Christine was smart, patient, grounded, and basically the only person capable of calming Hayden down. Their relationship was one of the best parts of the show because it felt believable. It wasn't nonstop fighting and sitcom chaos. It actually felt like two adults who loved each other trying to make things work, despite Hayden being completely insane half the time. But then you had Luther Van Dam, and Luther Van Dam was an absolute legend. Played by Jerry Van Dyke, Luther might honestly be one of the funniest side characters in sitcom history. The man was a disaster. He was the assistant coach who somehow seemed confused by everything happening around him at all times. His speeches made no sense. His stories went nowhere. His confidence was unbelievable despite constant incompetence. And yet somehow, he was lovable. You never wanted Luther off the screen. Every scene with him felt unpredictable because you genuinely had no idea what weird thing he was about to say. And then there was Dauber. If you watched the show, you remember Dauber. Played by Bill Fagerbeek. Dauber started as this goofy former player turned assistant coach who basically had the energy of a giant friendly golden retriever. The guy was enormous, awkward, weirdly innocent, and impossible not to like. Honestly, looking back now, it's funny realizing this is the same actor who later became Patrick Star on SpongeBob SquarePants. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it. One thing that made Coach special was its vibe. The show felt warm. And there's something a lot of older sitcoms had that's kind of disappeared. You could throw on an episode of Coach after school, after work, late at night, whatever, and it just felt comfortable. Lighting was warm, the football offices looked cozy, even the pacing felt calmer than modern sitcoms. The show never felt desperate. It wasn't trying to scream jokes at you every 3 seconds. It trusted the characters. And honestly, that's why it aged better than people realize. A lot of sitcoms from that era feel super over the top now. But Coach still works because the humor came from personalities instead of nonstop gimmicks. Hayden being stubborn, Luther being weird, Dauber being awkward, Christine trying to keep everybody sane. That formula never got old. There was something magical about network television in the late 80s and 90s. Back then, shows like Coach became part of your weekly routine. You didn't binge entire seasons in one weekend. You waited for episodes. You caught reruns randomly. Sometimes you discover an episode halfway through and still sit there watching it. And Coach was perfect for that kind of TV. You could jump into almost any episode and immediately understand the dynamic. Hayden is angry about something, Luther says something ridiculous, and Dauber accidentally makes things worse, and Christine rolls her eyes. Boom, instant entertainment. And the sports setting did help too. Even people who didn't care about football could enjoy it because the football stuff was really just background flavor, right? It wasn't a main part of the show. The real focus was on the relationships. But if you did love sports, especially college football, the show had even more charm. There's just something very nostalgic now about these old fictional TV colleges. The jackets, the locker rooms, the old school stadium shots. It feels like comfort food television. Now, here's the big question. Why did Coach kind of fade away compared to other sitcoms from that era? And honestly, I think there are a few reasons. First, the show was very grounded. It didn't have a huge gimmick. No supernatural elements, no outrageous catchphrases, no mega famous iconic moments that constantly get replayed online. It was just consistently good. And weirdly, sometimes that hurts a show's long-term legacy. Second, sports sitcoms can be tricky. If a show is heavily tied to sports culture, younger audiences sometimes skip over assuming it's not for them. But that's the thing about Coach. It really was for everybody. And third, it kind of got trapped between generations. Older audiences remember it fondly, but younger audiences didn't grow up with the endless reruns the way they did with shows like Friends or The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So over time, it slowly drifted into forgotten show territory, which is exactly why this series exists. One thing I really appreciate about Coach now is how low stress it is. And I mean that in the best possible way. Modern TV sometimes feels exhausting. Everything has to be darker, louder, more shocking, more dramatic. But Coach was just enjoyable. It's the kind of show you can put on while eating dinner or relaxing at night and instantly feel better. Sitcom comfort matters. Not every show has to reinvent television history. Sometimes a show's job is just to make you laugh and feel relaxed for 22 minutes. And Coach was elite at that. Even though people don't talk about it enough anymore, Coach had a really impressive run. The series lasted from 1989 to 1997. That's a long time for a sitcom, especially one without giant controversy, nonstop headliners, or flashy gimmicks. It survived because audiences genuinely like spending time with these characters. And that says more than hype ever could. Also, you can see traces of Coach in later shows, that grumpy but lovable mentor character, that emotionally immature but good-hearted guy, that mixture of sports and family comedy. A lot of later sitcoms borrow pieces of that formula. And of course, Luther Van Dam remains one of the all-time sitcom side characters. No question. Going back and watching Coach now feels like opening a time capsule for a completely different era of television. An era where sitcoms felt cozy, where characters could just exist without nonstop chaos, where shows slowly became part of your life over years instead of trending for 2 weeks online and disappearing forever. And that's why forgotten shows matter, because some of these series weren't just pretty good. They were huge parts of people's lives. Coach made people laugh for nearly a decade. Families watched it together. Sports fans loved it. Sitcom fans loved it. And even if it doesn't get talked about as much now, it absolutely deserves its flowers. So if you never watched Coach, or if you haven't seen it in years, go back and check it out. You might be surprised how well it still holds up. But alright everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of the 80s, 90s Forgotten Shows. Let me know in the comments, do you remember Coach? Who was your favorite character? And what forgotten 80s or 90s shows should we talk about next? And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.